Okay, let's finish up with the simple main points of tariffs for topic 4, manufacturing in the long 19th century. Leave it to you to decide whether you want to work through the two different sets of graphs on the supply and demand of modeling of a tariff and the debate over the effective tariffs and their potential role in the U.S. Industrial Revolution. Just a few things to note here. First off, I forgot to mention last time, keep in mind that when we're talking about high tariffs in the 19th century, they're actually, they look pretty low compared to what was typical of the 20th century and late 20th century, and these days even. These days, tariffs that are considered protective are more like 300%, tripling prices of goods compared to world markets. Unlike the tariff of abominations of 1828, which probably only added about 50% to the world price of goods. All right. So anyhow, you might want to look at the graphing to understand the ideas behind what happens in a market when a tariff is imposed. If you refer to the graph on the web page, and maybe it'll be a video with it, 3 points to try and make sure you understand. The first simply is that there are winners and losers from a tariff. The most obvious winner, the producers of goods who are sheltered from competition in the rest of the world. In the simplest possible model, shirts can be imported from the rest of the world at $50, and that creates a price ceiling for domestic manufacturers. They can't charge more than $50 for a shirt when that shirt's available from the rest of the world for $50. So, get the government to put a $10 tariff on the imports. People can still buy shirts in the rest of the world, but they're going to pay $50 to the rest of the world. $10 to the government equals a $60 price for shirts. Right there you see one winner in the tariff. The government's collecting $10 on every shirt that's imported. What's less obvious, or maybe more obvious, domestic producers are now getting $60 for a shirt instead of $50 for a shirt. And that $10 per shirt is a pure gain to domestic producers. The higher prices paid represent gains to producers or to the government for the most part, but those are, of course, being paid by consumers. And those higher prices paid represent simple losses to consumers. You might think on that basis that it's a zero-sum game. $10 more for every shirt paid is a loss to consumers, but that $10 is either going to government or to the producers. But that's not quite right, because some of the $10 is just going to be covering the higher cost of producing it at home instead of abroad. What's more, the higher price of shirts is going to mean that people are not going to buy as many shirts. Consumers don't get as many shirts. The shirt they didn't buy is a loss to them, and there's no offsetting gain. That's modeled graphically if you're interested, but the other point to make from the graph is to note that the higher price of shirts caused by the tariff on shirts will increase the production. And it's there that we get an interesting debate in economic history. So, for a long time, it was viewed that the tariffs in the 19th century didn't do much. But, as discussed in the, as shown in the graph on the web page, these economists Bills and Harley, who found evidence that the supply curve for cotton textiles was very flat. Flat in the sense then that if the price were pushed up, there'd be a big increase in the quantities produced. And of particular importance, the idea that if the tariff had been removed, causing the price of textiles to decrease, then there would be a big decrease in the quantity produced. So there's one view, Bills and Harley, saying that having the tariffs made a big impact on the production of textiles. Indeed, they say without the early tariff production through to the 1840s or so, that there would not have been a cotton textile sector, and that was one of the major early one of the early major industries in the American Industrial Revolution. On the other hand, we've got Temin and Doug Irwin, no relation to Jim Irwin. And Temin and Irwin dispute the findings of Bills and Harley, and they present evidence suggesting that the cotton supply curve was not flat, but was steep. Anyhow, don't worry about it unless you're interested, but the point is, for economists and historians, there is a possibility that government policy was a key factor in causing the rise of manufacturing. If so, we might be thinking of the rise of manufacturing in the early 19th century U.S. as being something like what happened in Japan in the early and mid 20th century, and later what happened in South Korea. A number of studies have suggested that South Korea and Japan and other countries have used tariffs to promote industrial expansion. The point being that even though the supply and demand model suggests that the losses from a tariff exceed the gains from a tariff, there's a bunch of folks who say, no, supply and demand misses the dynamic effects of a tariff. Maybe there's some learning by doing. Simply having the factories going enables people to learn how to bring costs down. Maybe there's some induced technological change or innovation. It's all highly speculative. But there is this idea that if you protect an infant industry, then it can grow up and you can end up with an industry that does not need a tariff, that is a highly productive industry that pays good wages, generates good incomes for the country. If so, the question always is, when will the infant industries grow up? Will they ever grow up? And to that, you might start looking into issues like the U.S. airline industry and the European airline industries, Boeing on the one hand and Airbus on the other, and the extent to which government support and subsidies are responsible for the ongoing viability of those companies or not. So maybe tariffs can be part of an industrial policy that promotes favorable economic development, or maybe tariffs are just a government program that help rich factory owners at the expense of consumers and others in the economy. All right, that's it for tariffs at a casual level. You can refer to the more in-depth treatments on the webpage. That's it for now.